Hi. So I want to talk a little bit about the why behind using the trigger method, because once you're activated, it's going to be extremely challenging to remember the 10 steps, to believe that it's worth doing. It can be a little bit challenging to get your brain to engage after being emotionally flooded. And if you're able to understand the why, the logic behind using this process, you're going to be able to rely on the logic in the moment rather than trying to navigate your emotional reasoning, if that makes any sense. So, this in the entire trigger method process is built on one concept, one entire practice, and it's the process of differentiation. So, when we go into a lot of these nervous system programs, I can think of quite a few famous ones that rely on something called brain retraining. We're actually being conditioned to believe that a trigger is some sort of flaw in the system, or if you're doing this work on your own and you've been doing practices, reading books, all these different things, and also engaged on social media for quite some time, um, you may deduce that your trigger is evidence that you're just too sensitive, or um, as evidence of being still broken, right? Um, a lot of the information that we have relied upon regarding the nervous system, regarding trauma recovery, regarding this whole area of what we call healing has actually it's been outdated for quite some time. But we're starting to see people catch up. Like we're starting to see more and more people talk about the nervous system and the polyvagal theory, and being the idea of being regulated all the time, soothing your emotions as like this actually isn't the way it's supposed to be. A lot of what's been happening is we've been flattening or attempting to flatten the human experience, and this doesn't last. This isn't long-term transformational change by any stretch of the imagination. A trigger, really, what a trigger is it's an old emotional learning that is firing off in real time, right? It's something your nervous system encoded a long time ago when certain conditions, or uh, there were just there were requirements for it, right? Like you learned to respond a certain way, or you learned something very specific about who you are. And when we're triggered, it's that old emotional learning coming to the surface. It's that way that so an emotional learning is something we encode in our nervous system regarding the world around us, regarding relationships, and regarding how we fit into those two things, how we fit into the world and how we fit into relationships with other people. But it centers around what we believe to be true about ourselves. Okay. So you can't reframe this kind of emotional learning. You also can't reason with it, because it's stored. How it's encoded and how it's stored is it's called implicit. It means that it's being held in the body, below language, below insight even. So you can navigate the healing space for ages, read books, take classes, do whatever for ever. You can understand your own wound inside and out, upside down, front to back, all of these things, but still have your nervous system fire the next time something gets very close to it. So this leads people to believe that, like, this is just the way that it's going to be. I just have to accept this about myself, or the more extreme of like, I'm broken, I'm flawed, I'm incapable, I'm useless, any number of things, right? But what people didn't understand, and what has misled people, is your emotional memories don't live in cognitive awareness. You can't touch an emotional memory that's stored implicitly with your thoughts. It just doesn't work that way. So I developed this trigger method, the 10-step process, because it doesn't argue with what was encoded in your system. It literally it walks you through the process from your mind down into the body, down into your felt experience, and allows you to feel it and be inside of it long enough for you to update it. And we update it with something called prediction error. And that's part of the larger process, but not really important for what I want to talk about here. So we're not arguing with the emotional learning. We're also not using other people's emotional learnings to kind of as a blanket statement about ourselves. So like, again, social media, right? Like they need to collapse things into something very flat. And so they'll say statements like, if you learned you were unworthy, or like, I am unworthy, I am unlovable, I am um, garbage, whatever it is. Yours and like an emotional learning, first of all, isn't that flat of a statement. It's not, I am unworthy. It is an entire schema that is held together. Well, it's first crafted in one early life experience, and then it's held together through repetition or repeated exposure that reinforces this. So a schema has many, many working parts. So when an emotional learning comes alive, it's not going to be as simple as I'm unworthy or I'm unlovable. It could sound something more like, I am responsible for holding it all together. And when I'm not responsible, when I'm not on guard, when I'm not uh, hyper vigilant, and you probably wouldn't use that word hyper vigilant, but when I'm not on guard, when I let my guard down, when I soften, whatever it is, something bad happens. Something bad always happens, and it's always my fault. And I feel so alone or whatever. Like it's big. It's complex. The human, you, me, we're not flat like I'm unworthy. Uh, Now, so there's that. So an emotional learning can't be repeated from something you hear on Instagram either, which really has derailed people. But so this brings us back to the entire mechanism of the trigger method, which is all about differentiation. It's learning to differentiate at scale. And so I'm going to kind of walk you through what that actually looks like. So every every trigger, every activation, like structurally, like how schemas are actually held together, is a fail to differentiate. And there are multiple things that are getting fused together that were never supposed to be fused together. And this 10-step process, the entire job of it is to pull those things apart so you can see them clearly and be able to differentiate on your own, but also like to pull the charge out of it. So there's the prediction error process, which happens when you precisely locate your own emotional learning, and that's closer to the end of the process. But there's also so much built into how I have this laid out that you're doing so much work with each step. So oftentimes when women first come to me or first start using the trigger method, um, there's reports of like, oh, I'm frustrated, or oh, I can't get past step two, or oh, I've tried it, but it doesn't make a lot of sense. And I mean, there's very real psychological reasons why this is happening is because you've never been asked to do this kind of differentiation before. You've never been asked to pull these things apart. And so psychologically, neurologically, somatically, everything is fused together, and it can feel extremely confusing to attempt to start to pull these things apart. Um, and so you need to also understand like there is a very real difference in understanding objective reality versus subjective reality. And so the first step of the entire document of the entire process is reality testing. So it's not that your interpretation of what's happening doesn't matter. It matters, and that would belong in a processing container. But you can't actually get to a very accurate interpretation until you can name and claim clearly what actually happened and separate it from what it means. So again, I work with ladies all the time, and everyone comes to me stuck in story, stuck in meaning making, and this is a form of fusion. It's enmeshment. It's not being able to separate the facts of the situation, what unfolded, versus how I interpreted that unfolding and what that means about me and the other person, right? So, um, let me give you an example. So, when I say objective reality, it would be stating the facts. She said this. Okay. Simple. She said XYZ. Now, if I'm talking about story or meaning making or subjective reality, I might say something like, she said this because she thinks I'm incompetent and she doesn't trust me. And that's just ridiculous. There's, that's interpretation. That's a story. And it's fused with the other person because you're trying to get into the other person's body or mind and determine exactly what it is that they think about you. So it's enmeshment. It's not being able to differentiate in, again, at scale. And right now what we're talking about is story from meaning. Um, so once you leave objective reality and go into subjective reality, so story, narration, meaning making, you stop being able to reality test your own situation. Like you're not responding to what happened in the moment anymore. You're responding to the meaning that you have assigned to the situation before anything has ever even been processed. So step one literally is the beginning of separation, of differentiation, of like determining objective reality versus subjective reality. And then you go into naming the emotion or um, understanding that like a thought and a feeling, this is, I think this is step three. So a thought and a feeling are not the same things. Or an emotion and a feeling are not the same things. So, an emotion is a visceral response. It's physiological. It's 90 seconds long. There's a hormonal, neurochemical, uh, all of those things. There's a cascade that happens to it, and it's very somatic and it's visceral, and it lasts 90 seconds. A thought, story, of feeling is that subjective reality that I'm not enough or I'm a piece of shit or they think I'm incompetent, blah, 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 whatever it is, right? Those two things are not the same. But most people live in the space of feeling, the conclusion space. So it sounds logical at times, but it's a thought that is disguised as an emotion. It's it's just in the mind. It's cognitive. And what lives underneath it, because as soon as a story gets attached to it, that story is reflecting something back to you, a belief about yourself, and it's shame, right? So, learning to differentiate between thought and emotion is another really important part of the process. And again, this can create confusion because if you've never been asked to do this before, you will get to each one of these steps and you'll be like, what? What is she talking about? What is she saying? I don't understand this. I don't. That's why I delivered this document in month one on day one, because this will be a process that, and depending on how activated you get, how chaotic your current life is, all of that stuff, it will be more challenging for certain individuals. And that's okay because we will stick with it and we will build internal trust and we will build relational trust and we will work it together through the process. I want you to understand that it's not a failure. It's not a failure to look at this and get confused. It's not a failure to not understand. It's not a failure to feel resistance. I promise. Okay. So another uh, layer of differentiation that takes place in the trigger method is between behavior and action. Um, your your behavior is going to be automatic. It's going to be whether you fawn, whether you freeze, whether you clap back with a sharp tone, whether you are the avoidant and you pull a disappearing act, right? Like that is behavior and it's conditioned. It's in the response. It's the nervous system acting out what it learned how to do. And in that moment, you have not given consent to that. You just are doing it. It's just happening. Whereas an action is what happens when you have the ability to take that same level of activation and route it through something different. We are routing it through your value system instead of the hurt parts of yourself. So you'll hear me say repeatedly, we are setting boundaries to protect our essence, not our wound. Because when you set boundaries to protect your wounded parts, you will negotiate with yourself, you will get confused, you won't follow through. It erodes trust more and more and more and more, which reinforces shame over and over and over and over again. Okay, so in step 5, it's I give you a very specific formula of using the statements either I am, or not either, but I am someone who values XYZ. I feel XYZ. And I need or I can. I originally wrote this as I need, but after many uses with myself and clients, I realized we can substitute I can in that area, and we'll get into that deeper when we walk through it together. But so the whole arc of this 10-step process, like to you, it probably looks like a worksheet and it's effort, and I don't really know if it's going to do anything. I can promise you it's doing stuff behind the scenes that you just are completely unaware of, and it is loaded with potential for transformational change. So, really, just engage. Engage until you hit a wall, engage until you're confused, and bring that information with you to our live calls, to our session, to the integration calls, because this is how we move forward together. My entire goal is not to fuse you to me, because that would be reinforcing this entire process. And I value autonomy, so I don't like that anyway. Um, but is to help you become sovereign, to help you navigate your situations. Like, I want you to be a differentiated individual so that one day, in 6 months, whatever it is, you can say, hey, thanks, Kelly. All of this information was really helpful. I feel more stable, etc. And I'm going to walk away. That is my goal, is to have you walk away, you know, essentially. So, and then the last part of the process is that you learn to differentiate between people. So, when we're activated or when we're triggered, we probably 99% of the time try to convince ourselves that it's something to do with the other person, either what they did, what they meant, what they should have known, without me having to say anything, right? Um, but that's just, it really, it's very rarely true. Like, we were involved, we're responding this way because it holds emotional meaning to us. Um, and so throughout this entire process, and by the entire process, I mean like the 6 months, the overall goal would be to be able to differentiate between where you end and someone else begins, right? Where your value is actually being dishonored, and where you are still defending the ground that you were standing on 20 years ago, or like trying to bring closure to something that started 20 years ago when you think that you're arguing with the person in front of you, right? You can't accurately set effective, efficient, stable boundaries until you can differentiate at scale. And it's not detachment. Like there is a difference between differentiation and detachment. This process doesn't require you to go cold in order to remove yourself further from the environment. What we're doing in this entire process is all about precision. We are trying to locate each and every spot where we are enmeshed with our environment, with the people, between our thoughts and our emotions, between our own behaviors and our personhood. It's at scale, right? And so I just really want you to understand, right? Because there's a really important component to the trigger method, which is locating your value system. And again, this is a work in progress. We're always moving, right? We're always growing and expanding. So it is a work in progress. These words will deepen in meaning and perception as you stay with them and keep them close to you. But a value isn't something that you are striving towards, right? Like we're not creating a vision board, we're not visualizing anything. We are actually taking the very real information that lives in our own body and we are excavating it. Values are ontological. They are part of who you are. It is you and it's meaningful. And when I say like a value might update or change or kind of morph, I went from uh, having the value of truth to having a value of integrity. They didn't it didn't change. They're just I developed deeper meaning and deeper understanding because I'm not truth was still very much externally oriented. Integrity was about like how I move, who I am, what's meaningful to me. Okay. So when we're working with the values section, we want to focus on not what sounds good to other people. Like, we're not looking for validation or praise from anyone else. It doesn't even need to be noticed by other people for it to feel real. And ontological value is going to hold up, it's going to have structure, it's going to have meaning regardless of whether it has permission to matter or not. So this is the work that I'm hoping you will do this month is at least the values section. I would love it if you went farther and attempted to use it or even got through the entire thing. That would be amazing. But the values do really have to be in place in order for a particular part of the process to like be engaged. But you can always come back to it, but it's part of the process. So you won't be able to wait until you're activated or triggered and then see what's meaningful in that moment because you'll be flooded. You won't be able to bridge the somatic experience with the cognitive experience when you're under threat. Um, so this part of the process really should be engaged with when, you're have 15 minutes before you're going to bed or first thing in the morning when you're drinking your coffee or sitting out and watching sunrise. Like try to engage with this part when you have some actual time to, be down and relaxed a little bit. Um, then there's another part, right? So oftentimes, when there's this level of merging or enmeshment that I'm kind of referring to with differentiation and all of that, there's also a contradictory experience of being kind of invisible or unseen, unmet, um, feeling like people don't really get you or nobody can really quite meet you in that space. And you might hear it in language of like, um, well, I shouldn't have to ask them to meet my needs. I shouldn't have to tell them that I matter. Like that language indicates to me that there's some level of invisibility being experienced, some level of isolation, loneliness. Um, and so the section where we talk about needs and naming needs within the values, so excavating your values and then naming needs that arise from that, this is the part that actually puts you back into the environment. This is the part that starts to say, yeah, I'm taking up space. I matter. I have a voice. I am not invisible. I'm in this room. See me. And this is vulnerable. There's a lot of fear around the needs section. So, again, this is a process. Like, we'll come back to it multiple times. So, don't worry. But you, right? Like, this is very meaningful information. Um, and then I think I've already kind of said this, but like boundaries are there to protect your essence. Like they're not there to protect your wounded parts. And if we, I already kind of said this, like if we try to set boundaries around something that's hurt, negotiation is always the next step. Well, it's not that big of a deal. Well, they didn't really mean to. I'll let it go this time. Maybe I overreacted. You know, and I know all of you know that kind of language, right? You're negotiating. You're negotiating your way out of situations, relationships, the environment, etc. We want to stop doing that. We want to learn how to set boundaries around our essence, our structure, our consciousness, our value, our inherent worth that doesn't require negotiating. And so as you move through this entire process, right, you're going to be encountering many, many hidden aspects of what it really means to create transformational change, right? So every single step of the process is very, very clinically backed. It's supported by my own process. I didn't find this and create some sort of, anyway, it doesn't matter. I worked with my own triggers. I I saw a coach and we worked on values and it felt too surfacey to me, but I was also simultaneously working on my triggers and trying to figure out like what how do these things like just they need something else. It can't be what everybody's saying it is. Um and that's with the values. I was like, oh, there's something way more meaningful here. There's actually something really, really important in values that too many people are keeping on the surface level, just like with brain retraining or reframing or any of these cognitively based therapies is you're keeping it on the surface. You're targeting beliefs and behaviors, and you're not targeting what you need to target, which is the emotional learning. We are run by our emotions, period, end of story. And anybody who tries to make you feel like you're the only one who's run by emotions and they're not, they just don't understand themselves. So you can just ignore that. Because they literally do scientific experiments, they literally do advertising, they literally do the algorithm on Instagram is run on emotions. They feed you a very specific algorithmic protocol of like, first we're going to scare them, then we're going to make them angry, and then we're going to show them like a love, soft, cry video. And I mean, it's being bred into you whether you know it or not. Every single thing that we do is an attempt to create more of an emotion or less of an emotion, right? People say, I just want to be happy. I just want peace. I just want whatever. I don't want that. When the reality of it is, you don't get to choose. The emotions are a code. It's part of the human experience. So we need to learn how to work with them and follow what their information that they're actually giving us so that one, we can unburden the nervous system, we can update these emotional learnings, our physical symptoms can start to go away because they don't need to scream at us anymore because we're actually finally listening. Our relationships get better because, right? Like, hello. Um, and don't get me wrong, I know not every relationship gets better. Uh, but so that's it. So I want you to really understand that the trigger method is like complex. It's not a simple worksheet. There is really a lot of stuff that's going on to in it. And the whole idea, well, two ideas. One, we're working on memory reconsolidation. So we're trying to update those emotional learnings and move them into explicit storage. And two, we are differentiating at scale within ourselves, outside of ourselves, all of it. We are differentiating and we are becoming autonomous individuals. So I hope that everybody has a chance to go through the trigger method and put it into practice and start excavating your values because we will be discussing this in our first live call. So I hope this works out for you all, and I'll see you very soon.